And the countdown is on. Orange and blue today. Andrew Mason here with you on a recovering from snow Friday afternoon. No music today. You're just hearing my voice. You're not going to hear the voice of Cecil Lammey today. He is away on assignment in the parlance of the late, great Irv Brown, who, of course, graced many airwaves here in the Denver market. But I'm joined by my friend Parker Gabriel of the Denver Post. And let's get right to the top of the show. The topic here, Sean Payton building a culture. Most of the re-signings or signings have been New Orleans Saints. Is this really becoming Sean Payton's team now?
Yeah, absolutely. What's up, Mace? How you doing? Happy Friday to you.
I'm happy Friday to you, Parker.
It's a good question. I mean, yeah. What's interesting, Mace, is like last year when they brought in, 5, 6, 7 former New Orleans players. Sean went out of his way to say that it wasn't about culture, that it was about understanding what the fit for the player was and knowing how he wanted to deploy that player. And then he said, Mike McGlinchey's about culture. Zach Allen's about setting culture. The guys that I'm familiar with are more just about knowing. But you also can't deny that, like, to some degree, it is about culture. Like, he's comfortable with them. He knows what they're going to bring, and he knows how they're going to work. And, like, what else is culture but for that? And so when you take those two things, plus two of the biggest off-field additions of the year are Pete Carmichael as a senior offensive assistant, Cody Rager as the vice president of player personnel. Like the New Orleans Northwest has continued. The migration has continued.
Indeed, and even Jim Leonard added to the coaching staff on the defensive side is somebody who spent a spring and summer playing for Sean Payton and knows his rhythms as well. I mean, this is all. It's just. There's some element of getting the band back together, but I think also with Carmichael, with Leonard, with someone like Adam Troutman going back, it's almost like you're trying to have as many people in the building who, if Sean can't be there to explain something that's being implemented, these other pieces, including Malcolm Roach coming in, who broke into the league as an undrafted rookie for Sean Payton 2020, they're the ones who can say, okay, this is what coach is trying to get you to do.
Yeah, definitely. And Troutman's a super interesting one because he, like, and this is I don't mean this as a good, bad or otherwise thing about him, but he is a Sean Payton evangelist. I mean, when he speaks in the locker room, it is about, hey, hang in there long enough, do it Sean's way, and eventually you will see the light. And that actually, I mean, I thought it really paid dividends, obviously, over the slow start last year to have some guys like him, maybe in not such a vocal way, but Lil Jordan Humphrey, similar thing. And you could see it and hear it in the way Adam Troutman talked as they got on that 5-game winning streak of see, I told you what was going to happen. Obviously, the season, finished in disappointing fashion. But yeah, I mean, it's no mistake. It's no mistake, regardless of, what the head coach says about it, that these guys are here for a reason.
On a micro level at tight end, Troutman back. They move on from Chris Manhertz. It's a position of apparent need for the Broncos, but we are sitting here effectively on day 5 of free agency because it really does start with Monday when you can actually talk to other teams. Are you surprised that they didn't add to that room just yet? That the only move so far were cutting Chris Manhertz and then bringing Troutman back, who did lead the team across the board in tight end categories, but that's more of a reflection on the lack of pass catching production from the room than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, Adam Troutman would be the first to tell you that he played a lot more and played a much bigger role in 2023 than he expected to. Yeah. And a lot of that obviously was about Greg Dulcich's injury, which really makes, like, I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but I think that injury, and Tim Patrick falls in this category too, but you could just tell in camp. I mean, Sean Payton had big plans for Greg Dulcich, and then he downplayed it. You go with who you have, you work with what you have, but they really I think they had big plans for what they were hoping he could do had he stayed healthy. And so, yeah, I am surprised they haven't added to it. And in fact, by basically trimming the room by only one, bringing back Troutman and releasing Manhertz, you end up in a situation where you have Manhertz, Dulcich, Lucas Krull, and Nate Adkins, plus you've brought back Michael Burton. There's not, you're not talking about 3 more bodies in that room, probably, especially with the veterans that you have there. And so it might come down to Dulcich or Krull. And then you also have, maybe you find somebody in the draft that you'd like, but I thought they would be more active on that front in free agency for sure.
Orange and Blue today, Andrew Mason, Parker Gabriel of the Denver Post filling in for Cecil Lammey today, and Cecil on assignment. And I'm glad you mentioned Lucas Krull, because his name is one that Cecil and I have talked about a couple of times. And you mentioned him hand in hand with Greg Dulcich. Dulcich may not have the trust of the coaching staff to stay healthy after last year for all the improvements in terms of this team having a lower injury rate. They feel their methodology helped cut that injury rate from previous years. But Dulcich couldn't stay healthy. Lucas Krull was playing more at the end of the season, and was a phenomenal defensive play away from having the kind of signature moment there back in week 18 in Las Vegas that can launch a career. Do you think that as we get into the summer, the Krull Dulcich, situation may evolve into a competition where only one gets a job?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's possible. Obviously we got a long way to go until then. And it's, it's not impossible. But, we always talk about trades more than they end up happening, unless you're a former class of 2022 quarterback, apparently. But it's also possible that one of those guys, I guess, if you were, who has the trust, you'd be talking about Greg, that there's somebody out there, come draft time, that somebody's interested in, and you're looking for an extra pick or whatever. But yeah, certainly, they're both young players. They're both talented. They can both stretch the field vertically when they're on the field. And if both of them are healthy and rolling along in August, that would be a pretty good gunfight, so to say.
It would. And Krull is another guy, to go back to Adam Troutman for a moment. You listen to Adam Troutman talk about Lucas Krull, and Krull talk about Troutman. And that's another layer to not only Troutman, but I think some of these ex-Saints that have come in is sort of the leadership that they have provided to their position groups by and large across the roster. Yeah,
definitely. It's like you almost forget, like, oh yeah, Krull, he came from New Orleans too. He was the cut down at the on cut down day, didn't make the 53, and then Denver scooped him up really quickly. So yeah, they're sort of across the roster, and every time you look, there's another one popping up from the Bayou, hopping on the flight to the Front Range.
Yep. Orange and Blue today, Andrew Mason, Parker Gabriel, the Denver Post here. So we've talked about tight ends. We've talked about the role in building the culture. Tight end, probably one of the top line needs for the Broncos. Another, obviously, is quarterback. We buried the lead a little bit.
I was going to say, I guess.
Yeah. So. I mean, we can't talk about quarterback all the time. And you know what? The last few minutes of the show, for people have said, talk about something else. Those minutes were for you watching this show. But now we're back to QB, because Jimmy Garoppolo, a name that had been floating around, somebody, he doesn't have an NFL connection to Sean Payton, but certainly has a skill set that could have run the rhythm and timing aspects of this offense. Of course, they share an alma mater, Eastern Illinois University. But Jimmy Garoppolo going off the available free agent board to the Los Angeles Rams today. Just, Parker, your thoughts, and did you think that there was a possibility that maybe Jimmy G could have wound up in Denver, at least for this year?
Yeah, I thought it was a possibility, although one of the things, I guess, as we've sort of filtered through, and they've all turned into no's, but as you've gone from them, sorting the maybes from the seems like no, age has been a factor there. And so from the start, it was, Jacoby Brissett seems on paper like you'd make sense. He's 31, less likely. Some of the younger guys are the ones that sort of the most conversation, centered around. And so Jimmy Garoppolo, he's not old, but I think he's 31 or 32. And so I sort of thought I mean, you could see it, but they've made it pretty clear by this point that they're not going to sign a quarterback just to sign one. So
Yeah.
for all of the, I mean, I thought I wouldn't have believed you if you'd have said we'd be sitting here on Friday, late afternoon, and Denver hadn't added a quarterback yet in free agency, but they are seemingly taking the approach that, if they don't see it as a clear upgrade and perhaps if they don't like the price of upgrading, modestly or moderately, they've been comfortable to just keep mining for what at this point, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned price because I think there are two layers of price and the Broncos have to consider both of them. They have to consider the cap figure, obviously. And with Sam Darnold, for example, the Broncos did not get to the point of making an offer, but there was a line they didn't want to cross. And $10 million for 1 year for Sam Darnold was on the other side of that line. You get to Sam Howell, traded yesterday, and not that Kenny Pickett was going to be on the Broncos' radar, but with Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett, effectively, when you get into the draft value calculus of going through the picks and all that, they're roughly equivalent to late third, early fourth round pick in terms of what the draft value was. Sam Howell, I believe, in one draft value model was the equivalent of the number 95 overall pick, and the other one was, I believe, 111. So one in the third, one in the fourth. And when the Broncos have only 2 picks before pick 120 in this draft, even that is probably too rich for the Broncos' blood, especially when going after a quarterback in the draft and maybe having to move up to do it is something that is very much on the table right now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, can I run a quarterback scenario by you, Mace?
Absolutely. Let's do it. We're spitballing. Let's bring it on.
Yeah, well, because just with Sam Howell and Kenny Pickett, I think you sort of see, potential paths and potential pitfalls with the Broncos in terms of drafting a quarterback. Like the thing that's interesting about if you don't take one in the first round, obviously, like the investment level is lower, the risk is lower, but also your chance of hitting on a guy being your answer for a decade is lower. What's interesting about Sam Howell is, Washington drafted him. He played, he showed some, obviously he's not a perfect player, but in 2 years they flipped him and basically he appreciated in value. They got better return than where they drafted him. Whereas Kenny Pickett goes in the first round, he also plays, but he loses value. So, Howell goes from being a 5th rounder, you get late third equivalent value for him. Pickett's a 1st rounder, you get 4th round equivalent value for him. So this is, it becomes interesting. And I was thinking back to in week 7 when Sean Payton was talking about drafting quarterbacks as a commodity, where you almost wonder, I mean, if the Broncos don't take a quarterback in the first round, there is some value in seeing what a mid-round type of guy can do. And if you find the right one of them, even if he's not a franchise option, you could end up in the scenario that Washington's in where you can deal that player and draft another one. You could have to compete. I thought there are two, they're examples of quarterbacks that are in situations not unlike where it looks like Denver could be headed, basically.
And it's really interesting to also look at how quarterbacks evolve during their time in college and how there's an ebb and flow to how they're perceived going into a draft. Now, obviously, in the evaluation, the last year before the draft, most evaluators will tell you it's the most important. So Sam Howell goes into 2021 at North Carolina, widely tapped to be a 1st-round pick. But for various reasons, they lost basically all of their skill position players, new group of running backs, new group of receivers. Timing was an issue there, especially early in that season. Howell's stock went down that year. I mean, if you went into 2021 and said, Kenny Pickett's going to go before Sam Howell in the next draft class, I would have said, you're crazy, right?
And by 102 picks.
Yes, right. And yet we are sitting here talking now, even though not that Howell has become a superstar, but he is in a much better position now to evolve and maybe become at least a solid mid-range starting quarterback than Kenny Pickett. And I look back and I think, okay, that's sort of the pitfalls of making a call of making a call based more on that last year than the body of work. And then so you start looking at a bigger picture on some of these guys. If you get into day 2, for example, someone like Spencer Rattler, there's a quarterback who at one point you would have said he's going to be a surefire first rounder. And obviously he got benched at Oklahoma, ended up transferring. But now we start seeing the day-to-day growth of him in Mobile, for example. Yep. I thought he made the most progress from day to day, which is crucial because that means he's taking teaching, ingesting it, and incorporating it into his actual play. And then you start looking back on, okay, well, this guy, he's been on radars going back to when he was a senior in high school, for crying out loud.
Right.
Does he become that type who maybe you take on day 2, and if he doesn't become a star, he still appreciates in much the same way that Sam Howell did?
Yeah, and I think that's honestly, it also may lend some insight into the lack of activity here. I mean, every quarterback that has come off the board, whether via free agency or trade so far since free agency started, except for Sam Darnold and Gardner Minshew, who could be bridge starters and also got the most guaranteed money, every other quarterback has gone into a situation almost expressly to be a backup. And so what it looks like is Denver is saying, hey, listen, we don't feel like we need a guy just to come in and have 1 year. We're looking for a guy that has some upside. And if we can find that at the price we like in free agency or via trade, we'll go for it. And that's why the most conversation probably was around Sam Howell and Sam Darnold. But if not, then we will take our prospecting in terms of quarterback value to the draft, and whether it's at 12 or whether it's trading back or trading up or whatever, you're looking for a guy who ideal world is your answer for the next 10 to 12 years. And if not that, then someone who you at least think he's going to be worth as much or more than you paid for him, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now.
Yeah. And by kind of doing what they're doing, the other thing is that even though the touch points with these quarterbacks have been, some Broncos people meeting with them at the Senior Bowl, in the case of Michael Pratt, for example, having those meetings at the Combine. So we're not yet even at top 30 visits, but clearly they have come to a decision that they are comfortable enough with however the board falls, saying one of our quarterbacks is coming from this group, even though we don't yet know who that is, and we're still even getting all the pieces of information we're going to need. It seems like they've already decided that they're at a point of comfort to saying, okay, one of Michael Pratt, Spencer Rattler, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., J.J. McCarthy, even like Drake May, if he ends up being QB4, that they're comfortable with one of those quarterbacks. And it does. And while they may have a preference of who, that maybe most of those quarterbacks are already on the other side, on the positive side of that cut line of saying we're comfortable with developing them and seeing where they go.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where, maybe you like, there's a certain group you like as a trade up, that you're willing to trade up for. There's a certain group, maybe there's a guy or two that you like if he's there when you pick. And then the key, and this is where, every front office is tasked with having the correct temperature of the rest of the league. The key for George Payton and Sean Payton, if they don't like the value at 12, is how far can we go back and still get the guy that we want? And that all of that Mace today, or in the last 24 hours, been made more complicated by Minnesota, which has sort of been like the thorn in Sean Payton's side this entire time. It's their radio guy that's leaking his affinity for JJ McCarthy. It's them that they're sitting one pick ahead. Now they have 2 first-round picks. And, oh, by the way, they got Sam Darnold, the bridge quarterback, too. So it's like every quarterback issue for the Broncos this year is like mirrored by Minnesota, and Minnesota's just sort of so far had maybe the upper hand, if you want to put it that way. So it's been an interesting offseason for a fan base and a head coach, at least a fan base that doesn't like a head coach very much.
You wonder if that kills George Payton a bit too.
Yeah.
Because he leaves, and of course the year after he left, they blow out Rick Spielman, who was his longtime boss and mentor up there. But yeah, a what if that I look back on, I think about a lot, how close this team was to picking substantially higher. And one of those moments you look back on is the no call on Kareem Jackson's hit on Josh Dobbs, which got him suspended and effectively ended his Bronco career. And if they make that call on the first possession, the Vikings keep possession and the Broncos don't get a short field, their draft positions are flip-flopped.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
had the Broncos not beaten Green Bay and Minnesota, had they not fared so well against the NFC North in two really close games, we'd be talking about an entirely different situation.
Yeah, 3-1 against the NFC North, and the only loss was to Detroit. But yeah, those Minnesota and Green Bay losses, because you can look at bad no calls in both games that had a huge role in swinging the result. But this is where the Broncos find themselves right now. They're picking number 12, and if you're going to get past Minnesota, it's going to take future draft capital. Sean Payton has no problem dealing future draft capital. George Payton didn't until the Russell Wilson trade.
Right.
Might be a little reluctant now, but ultimately, this is the thing. It's going to be Sean Payton's call as to whoever the young quarterback is. And I think we all feel pretty certain there's a quarterback coming in the draft.
Yeah.
Whoever that guy is, that's going to be Sean's choice.
Yeah, no doubt. And like you said, I mean, Minnesota now holding number 11 and number 23 from Houston, you really sort of set the bar on trading up, right? I mean, you're either just acknowledging the fact that you are going to take a bite at the quarterback apple after them, or you are setting the bar at a really high price to what you have to give up to leapfrog them, whether that's at, all the way up to like 3, 4, 5, or even if that's just going from your current position to, let's say, 8 or 9. Minnesota still is sitting there with more ammunition than you present year. And so they've got their work cut out for them to maneuver the draft in such a way that they're able to take, their first realistic choice.
Yeah. So some of the comments coming in the chat room saying, Peyton will squeeze 6 or 7 wins out, trade up next year. If you want to trade up next year, it's a more limited class. And that's the thing. I mean, we're talking about arguably 5 quarterbacks in the first round this year, if you include Bo Nix. And I think in the end, Bo is going to go in the first round just because of the quarterback need. But are we talking about only 2 next year? That's something to weigh as well.
Yeah, definitely. And even if you're talking about potentially being, near the top of the draft next year, like Denver has enough needs that I don't know that you trade, that you're moving up to 9 and taking a quarterback this year, or taking one at 12 and then hoping to draft a quarterback again next year. But again, Sean Payton was after you got Wisconsin connections, Mace, and I grew up there. And when he, during the season, talked about sort of the Ron Wolf philosophy of drafting quarterbacks, I mean, you're not trying to pick at the top of the draft in 2025, but that could become a possibility of, hey, you draft a quarterback, maybe in the mid or late rounds this year, you see what he has for a year. And that certainly doesn't preclude you from taking another one next year, regardless of where you end up picking.
It's the one value of taking a quarterback day 2, day 3, because you're clearly not married to that quarterback unless they are the outlier. It certainly it should free you up to do something different next year. My only thought is, and this is where my background working for teams in the past comes in. I've been in those marketing meetings, and I can tell you it's going to be a tough sell to the community,
right? If
your quarterback room is Jarrett Stidham, Ben DiNucci, and say Michael Pratt. That one might be, and not only a tough sell to the community, you're gonna have to deal with a lot of people out there. They're writing articles about the quarterback room, putting the Broncos like 32 dead last.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment. Like take San Francisco, right? Because they hit the Powerball with Brock Purdy, and no one will ever expect that to happen again. But they also had the big shiny trade up quarterback. It didn't end up working, but they had they made the mega move for Trey Lance. You sort of satisfied the marketing side of it, the excitement side of it, while you actually found the right guy over here. And then it all ends up working out. So at the end of the day, look, it doesn't matter if Bo Nix is the right guy. Like, who cares if you get him at 12 or at 40 or 45 or wherever? Like, if it works, it works. But certainly it's easier to pitch if he comes in as a high pick.
Something about the Shanahans, because in 2012, it was RG3 top of the draft. That was very much the owner's guy. And then round 4, Kirk Cousins. RG3's on television. Kirk Cousins just signed a contract to give him another massive Powerball-worthy largesse down in Atlanta. Parker, appreciate you coming on. I know it's a busy week for you, as it is for all of us in the Broncos media sphere, but appreciate you coming on and chopping it up today.
Oh, absolutely. It's been great. I'm happy to do it. And it's going to be, there's more interesting weeks ahead. That's for sure.
Yeah. I'm glad we could get you on, because just for the viewing audience out there, Parker, Cecil, and I basically watched the Senior Bowl week together up in the stands and had a lot of chats just like this one that we're having. So glad to kind of peel back the curtain and share that with you. Of course, thanks for watching. And as always, we appreciate you, and we'd appreciate if you like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss a vid of not only Orange and Blue Today, but Coffee Break that Rachel Veal has and the other shows that we're cranking out here at Denver Sports. And if there's news breaking over the weekend, we'll probably hop in and do something as well, because you get Sunday and Monday, Parker, it's a very interesting deadline for some contract terms, like Cortland Sutton having a little extra money that gets guaranteed to him if he's still on the team. So we always have to kind of keep our eyes peeled for things at this time of year.
Yeah, I've been this is terrible to admit, but I never watched The West Wing when it was on TV, so I've been going. It's my off-season project to work through it. There's no lid. Unlike the White House, you do not put the lid on NFL news. Anywhere, anytime. You're never safe, so you just stay near your laptop.
Just like last Sunday night, Russell Wilson going to Pittsburgh. It came during the Academy Awards. I mean, he was out at a party that night. Like I put a story up of him today, and the picture was from an Oscars party in Beverly Hills. And that night he was agreeing to terms with the Steelers, and his social team was putting up a video. There is no downtime, even when you're on vacation. It's just part of the gig. Parker, appreciate it. Sean Gates, producing this show. Thank you for everything, getting this set up. And Cecil will be back here after the weekend on Monday, and we'll have plenty more to talk about. It's going to be week 2 of free agency, but also counting down to the league meetings in Orlando the following week. And a lot of stuff's going to go down there, certainly. So we'll keep you in touch with that. For Sean Gates, Parker Gabriel, the Denver Post, Andrew Mason, thanks for joining us on Orange and Blue Today. We'll talk to you.